Welcome to the Book Editor Show. This is show number 13, lucky number 13. Today we are starting our four-part series on editing tips. We'll hit this off with general editing. I am Clark Chamberlain. I am joined today by my prolific co-host, the man who classes up this entire show, Peter Turley. Peter, how are you doing today?
Well, I've heard everything now. Never been called classy, except by you. No, I'm doing really great. I'm getting over like my second cold of the winter, so I swear it's just trying to kill me off this year, and it's doing a good job. So if I just slump off the chair, then just finish the show, and then I don't know, give someone a call.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you've got the show's needs put above your own. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, prioritizing.
That's right. That's right. So, well, it's good to have you here. I'm excited about doing these next four shows. Just really, bringing people something that they can just put to use right away. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it's and we were just talking just beforehand, weren't we, about trying to just cutting to the point and keeping things concise and actionable. And I think these tip shows are going to be really where we get to sort of get a lot of useful content across, and hopefully it'll be useful for everyone out there. And then we can start to use these tips to work on submissions and things. So I think it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, I do too. And that you're going to be able to just take an idea, and if it's just one of the tips, like today we're going to present 7 of these tips. If you can take one per week, take one per day, go to your work, and you just put it to work right immediately for you, and hopefully you can come up with really useful editing and to just make your book stronger. Why don't we go ahead? Let's just jump right into these. For our first one, our first general editing tip is read aloud. This is if you're just finishing up your first manuscript, second draft, third draft, you sit down and you read it out loud and start to pick up on things. You read it to yourself, you read it out loud to someone else, you read it to your dog. It doesn't matter. You're just reading it out loud. How have you used this one? Do you do this with all your work too, Peter?
Well, to be honest, I didn't do it naturally. It was sort of something, which is why this tip show is going to be so great, that I had to hear from someone else first, and I was like, no, that's a really good idea, and I'd never thought of it. And it's amazing how the difference it makes, and the things that you spot, and the tense issues, or just how a sentence can just be a little clumsy and clunky, and it can sound right when you're writing it because you just love everything that you write, and then when you read it aloud and you're like, oh, that sounds horrible.
I know.
But I think sometimes like reading to someone else can help as well, because if you can still be a little close when you just read it aloud. Or like you said, to the dog, and if the dog leaves the room, then
yeah, then it's no good at all. If the dog doesn't like it, you're done. So
it can sense evil and bad writing.
But it really does, it helps hear it all. Because when we write, we're not necessarily writing for audio production. We're not writing for someone to listen to it. And sometimes we use, and we're going to hit some of these in some of our shows here with the line editing with the next ones, but we use some words, that just come across, like you said, clunky. It doesn't have the flow that you want it to. And so reading it out loud is going to give you that. And identify, oh my goodness, yeah, I got to fix this, and you can just mark it. You're not editing at this point. You read it out loud, you can just mark where you need to come back.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're talking, like I was just listening to you talk then, and you choose the words that sound right, and they kind of go with the intonation of your voice. But if you're writing, you can have a tendency to just pause for a minute and try and think of a good word, and it might not fit well in the way that it sounds, and you might not pick that up when you're writing it, because you do sort of second guess your word choice a little bit.
Mm-hmm. You really do. And this also is good for pacing, for timing, and making sure that you're hitting the points that you're trying to get across. So,
yeah. And that your commas are in the right place as well, because that's something that comes natural to speech, doesn't it?
It does, yes. That you're pausing in the right places. Also, that it makes sense. Like sometimes you'll place an and. I don't know if you've ever read the book Eat, Shoots, and Leaves. It's a great editing book. About placing punctuation in the right place, because you're talking about a panda bear eats, shoots, and leaves, but you could also say, that you sit down, have a meal, kill the guy, and walk out. So it just depends on the what you're trying to mean and making sure the punctuation's in the right spot.
Yeah, because it changes it completely, doesn't it? So it's so important.
It really does, and it's a lot of fun. I saw another one that said something about eat grandma, and I don't remember exactly how it went, but it was like, very zombie-ish, because the punctuation was in the wrong area.
Yeah.
So
that would be leathery.
Our second tip for general editing is examine the macro before the micro. The reason for this, is that you want to take a look at the entire manuscript. You want to take a look at your entire work before you start editing. The tendency, you get done with that first draft, is you want to immediately go to your line edits and start, making all the sentences sound really great. But the truth is, you might be cutting an entire scene. You might be cutting characters out. You might be cutting chapters. And this is going to save you time if you examine the entire work first to make sure that you've got things that you want. And if you need to cut something immediately, that this just didn't work with the story and the flow, I'm just going to cut it right now. Then you don't waste hours of time working on these micro areas before you hit the macros.
Yeah, and I've done that. That's happened to me. Like making something really tight and precise, and the prose is just great, and then you don't even use the text, and that's time pretty much wasted. I mean, it's always useful, it's always practice, but if it's not going to be going into your work, then you could have saved yourself a bit of hassle.
Yeah, and that's another reason why that I really always recommend that vomiting first draft. That you're just getting all the stuff out that you're thinking of before you start to edit. You're finishing the whole thing before you start going back and editing anything, because you just don't know what you're going to keep. So it's funny how when you're done with it and you've put it away for a little bit and you're thinking about it, you're like, oh my goodness, yeah, that did not work. That's just not working at all, and it just doesn't belong here.
Yeah, I'll just take a moment there to just say that I always recommend NaNoWriMo to anyone, National Novel Writing Month in November, just because that really taught me to turn off that inner editor and to just get it all out. And such a time constraint, you've got no choice. And a practice like that, you keep that for the rest of sort of your writing life, and that's what you want to be doing.
Yeah, it's just all about speed, and then that you're coming back, and the editing is where you're really putting all the really great writing skills to use, and you're just really building it all together. Third tip here, number 3, use the same tense in your narrative. Whether you're past tense, present tense, but you're not mixing your tenses. One of the things that I do for this is that I look at the verbs in the sentence to make sure that they stay in the same tense. Sometimes when you're writing, especially at first draft, and you're vomiting it out on the page, you have the tendency maybe to mix a present tense and a past tense verb, and you just want to make sure that you're getting those so that they line up correctly, because there's nothing worse than incorrect tenses in your narrative, because it pulls people out. It's those potholes that jump people out of the story. How do you have any other additional tips to help? I'm always trying to think of ways you can just jump in and find this stuff and make it make sense real quick.
Yeah, I mean, the reading aloud, for one, you'll pick stuff like that up straight away. Because that's completely different to just silently scanning the ends of words in your head, and as you're reading it out loud, you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. But also, when you're going over it, and it helps me to have a printed copy, and that's always part of my editing process, to go through a printed copy with highlighters and make notes and read through it. And sometimes that might be easier than doing it on the screen. Try both. Read it out loud, print it out, and you'll spot things like the tenses, and if you're using the right ones, or if you've changed. And you were saying something before about the confusion of dialogue tense and sort of narrative tense.
Oh yeah, exactly. So one of the things you're not going to do is that you don't want to have dialogue can mix this. Dialogue, you're going to have a character who's speaking about the future or about the present or about the past. It's okay that you're writing in past tense through your narrative prose, but when you get to the dialogue, you don't have to write that all in the past tense prose. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that. So
that'd be an interesting book.
That would be a really interesting book. So I had a colleague that wanted to write a book with everything that was just done in people's heads, like those the old noir novels. It's like, and I thought this, and so no one ever says anything. It's just all what they thought in their head. But I don't know that would work so well.
So it's like so dramatic, isn't it? It's like kind of like the Sin City movies, where everyone's like talking in really gruff voices about how they feel and how they've been misled and betrayed.
Yeah. So definitely, when you're making the sentence, your tense is the same. Sometimes you may need to jump over. There's a fantastic amount of resources online that will help you with verb tense to make sure that you're using the right one. I know that like the word laid, laid, lay, lane, and that one can be a little confusing. So some of the words, that this is the time that you've got to take that extra time to make sure you're using the proper tense. It not only does it flow correctly and it sounds correctly, but it also makes you look like a word hero. That the grammar Nazi that picks up your book doesn't have a lot to point out at the end of it because you've gone through and made sure. So.
Yeah, and just to say there, you can you can get verb tense charts, like online, and they can be useful just as a reminder. If you know obviously what tense you're writing in, and if you want to be like a super geek, you could print one out and put it on your wall, or but just to refer to it when you're going through the editing process, they're pretty useful.
Yeah, they really are, and something you definitely want to do and make sure you've got it all put together the right way. Our fourth tip for today is going to be shorten those sentences. It was Kurt Vonnegut who said, you don't use semicolons. All they do is show you've been to college. And that was one of I used to have these sentences that were ridiculously long. It's comma, 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 semicolon, maybe toss another semicolon in. And the sentence could work, but my goodness, it just was so clumsy to read. And one of the things that I've found that's really helpful is that if you've got something that's running long, you've got it broken up with a semicolon or with a comma at some point, but it's just lengthy. A lot of times at that break, you can just stop the sentence, and then you create the second one as a second sentence. You just chop them in half, and they're much easier to read.
Yeah, I'm so guilty of this. I still am. I don't know why it is, whether it's because it relates to natural speech or, but I have to go through and just pluck them out because I don't know why I do it. I hate that I do it, but I think reading Hemingway, like Ernest Hemingway, is like a really good he's a great tutor in short sentences, and someone like him or Cormac McCarthy, who they keep to short, clean, tight sentences. That's great kind of revision for practicing this type of prose.
Yeah, because just because you can do something complicated, it doesn't mean that you're going to reach the audience that you want to. The more complicated this becomes, the more complicated. Not complicated, the more professional someone has to be able to decode what it is that you're trying to say. And that's the thing, And it's funny that you mentioned Hemingway. Have you heard of Hemingway app?
No.
Okay, so I just discovered this about 2 weeks ago. It's called the Hemingway app. It is available, of course, on devices, but you can get a copy on your computer. I think it was $10, and I went ahead and sprung the money for it. But what it does is it goes through and it says, hey, this is passive voice. You have this many sentences that are hard to read, this many sentences that are difficult to read, and it just kind of points out some of this stuff. It doesn't fix it for you. You got to go in and do the work. But it's a pretty cool little program to help show you, hey, you know what, you're running really long on this this sentence, and it's becoming really complicated. So, and then it
So
gives a
have you
rating.
found that useful?
I do find it useful, just to go in and remind myself, if I'm having a hard time, like I've become close to the work, I've just skipped over things, and I take it in a chapter at a time, and I just look at it, and I go through and I say, well, where can I really cut this sentence to be shorter? How can I make this flow easier? Now I'll read it out loud, and sometimes I skip them. Sometimes that's how you have to say it, but 90% of the time, cutting that sentence in half in force, if it was one of my really long ones, just makes it flow better and keeps the pacing fast.
Yeah, definitely. And removing sort of like useless words can really help you cut sentences in half. If you're just like comma splicing, or you're just trying to say, then this happened, and just adding on and adding on and adding on, taking out these words like next and then, and suddenly like you can just trim the sentence right down, and you don't have to have it all as one long running thing, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. You can have that happens, end of sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's easier for the reader to engage with it. They're not. It doesn't get complicated, and it's not this cow trail that you got lost on it. Just winding back and forth, trying to figure out, well, where is this going?
Yeah, and then your eyes have to scoot back up to kind of figure like what's actually taking place. You're like, where did this sentence even start?
Yeah, and especially if you have long sentences where you're talking about multiple characters, those can be very confusing. Where you've started with a pronoun like him, and then you've started talking about another male character, and then you've said him again, and well, which him did that refer to? Did that him refer to the first one or the second one? And so making sure that you're shortening these up, it keeps it more clear on who it is that you're speaking about, and keeps it in the head of the reader more clear.
Yeah, that's so important.
All right, number 5, rewrite the passive voice. So passive voice is a terrible thing to have. I don't know why exactly, but it is. And it's one of the things that a lot of people say. You want to have an active voice. This is a hard one though, because it's not just I'm going to just eliminate the word. It's not like just eliminating lazy words. This is having to usually rewrite the entire sentence and switch it back up. Of course, we're talking about getting rid of the be verbs, the to be verbs, and these include is, are, has, have, had, been, be, being, was, were, and some combinations of those. So, like I said, these all require rewriting. I've got one trick that I think at least one of them that's easy to do, and that's you go in and you look at a verb that ends in ing, and you change that to ed, or you just change it to its proper, to a different tense with it. So this is an example. He was holding up the store. So there we have the was, that's weak. It's a to be verb. If we drop the holding, we change the holding, instead it becomes held. So then we change it to he held up the store. It's easier, it removes that was. Another example, she was wearing the golden necklace. So you change the was, or you change the wearing to wore, so she wore the golden necklace. And that just remember, it just makes it fast, easy. This is one you can go through, find all your ing verbs, change those out. It's the fastest one without having to rewrite the entire sentence.
Definitely, and to remember that the thing doing the action comes first. So the boy threw the ball. Not the boy. The ball was thrown by the boy. So,
Yes.
the boy would come first because he's the one doing the throwing, instead of having the ball come first and that was thrown by, and that's having something done to it. And it's just so much more direct to have an active voice. There's like more energy in it, isn't there? And it's just I don't know, zesty.
There really is. And when you're talking about inanimate objects, sometimes there are two inanimate objects in your sentence, and there is no boy doing an action, and so these ones become a little bit where we maybe just gloss over them. So we talked about this one off air, and this was a sentence that I had in one of my books, and it was the entire room was decorated in rich dark tones, which doesn't sound bad, but it does have that to be verb was in there, and this requires a rearrangement here. And so we're talking about the rich dark tones. So the rich dark tones decorated the entire room. So I had to move those dark tones to the beginning of it. They were doing the decorating, and the room was what it was being done to. And so, yeah, you just remember that you've got something and something. Someone did something, something did something, and a thing did something. If you have to rearrange these, I know.
Sounds like my first draft. when I don't know anyone's name.
Yeah, I've got those two. The boy, the hobo.
Yeah. The old man.
The old man. Yep. Yeah. Before you put all that together, but these ones here, like I said, these ones take a little bit more time. But the couple quick tricks, that you can go through and identify some of these and be able to get rid of them without having to rewrite the entire sentence, and chop it all up and change everything. Did you have any other little tips on that one?
No, yeah, just to go over to use find and replace, which is obviously any writer's best friend, and check for was, and being as well. That's a good one to type in, because you'll find out that's like a passive kind of phrasing, where the ball was being thrown. That flag that up for you. Began to, where you begin to sit up, or you begin to walk into another room. It's like, that's just so passive. It's like, do it instead of beginning to do it. Just do it. And we do have a tendency to say these things.
And let's connect this one back up to where we were talking about tense. If you're using the word begin or begun, that really is moving it into an action that's almost present, or maybe even a future, where you want to keep things grounded in your same tense. That it, no one begins to do something. You're right. You just do it, or you haven't done it yet.
It's almost describing the thought. To begin to do something is to just think about it.
Uh-huh.
How else do you begin to do anything? Unless I don't know, you began the journey. No, I'm not going to go there. It's problematic. Look it up and get rid of it.
It is problematic, but it is one of those words that if you just eliminate it from your vocabulary, it just makes it easier to write active sounding, fresh prose. So
fresh, like pH fresh.
So number 6, moving along here. Number 6, the show versus tell. Oh my goodness! I wish I could have written a bunch of descriptions for this. This is a difficult one. I have some problems with this one still. Because you think that you are showing it when in fact you're just telling it, or because I can always see it with feelings. That you can say that the person felt sad. That doesn't really do much for you, and like being able to come up with a whole description in the scene, why they feel sad, that one makes sense. But sometimes when you're just doing simple action lines, where you're like, he picked up the gun, that really is just telling, he picked up the gun. And so when you want to add more show to this, in a way that you're doing this is adding description and feeling. And so you have feeling for what the person is, feeling as they pick it up, and a description of the gun. What kind of gun was it? Something added to that, so that adds more of the entire show, so they can see the picture in their mind, versus just telling it directly.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It is about sort of creating the image, isn't it? I was just sort of, as you were talking, then just looking up a quote that I remembered. I hope I'm not misquoting it, but it says Anton Chekhov. It's like a famous quote, and he says, "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on the broken glass." And it is about that. Instead of saying the moon shone, you could say about, you make it more descriptive and more involving the setting, and create the picture, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it gives you an opportunity here to really flesh out a scene. One of the things you want to be careful of is you're not adding a ton of description, especially that you're especially when you start adding the beautiful, expansive, and you're like just throwing all these descriptive words into one thing. That doesn't make this better. That just makes that more clunky to read. But small descriptions, adding that feeling, that's just where your target's at. And
Yeah.
that was a great example with the moon there.
Because it's like you can say the sort of, he could see, the moonlight reflected in the glass or on the surface of the lake or something that creates a bigger picture, but you don't have to then say how great the moonlight is or, this wonderful silver, you don't have to go into that because it doesn't really matter. You're trying to keep it moving forward, and that stuff bogs it down, doesn't it, when you start using too many adjectives to describe the moonlight. We know what moonlight is. We know it looks nice.
Yeah, we do. And one of the things that you're going to want to be careful of here, is that there are sometimes when, yes, you just tell a story, or you just tell a line. You don't have to eliminate all the tell from everything, because you can do description in some of this, but sometimes the description becomes too much. Sometimes feeling becomes too much. Sometimes you're not allowed to use the feeling that you want to, because if you're, and we're going to get to POV here in a moment, but if you're non-POV character, your antagonist, and you're not in the antagonist's point of view, you don't want to describe what the antagonist is feeling, because that that head jumps, and that goes against what it is you're trying to do. But
I think especially got me to thinking, like, if you say writing a thriller, or you want a lot of action to be happening really quick, and you don't want to get caught up in necessarily showing like the whole picture, and if someone's kicking down a door, the man burst through the door, it might suffice in cases like this where you want things to be happening really quick and short sentences, and you don't want to constantly be painting a bigger picture, or you want to narrow the focus, then a tell can be okay.
Yeah, well, no, because just think about this. Let's just take your door instance here. So what am I going to do? The oak door had ornate engravings down the side of it, and the brass knob had green because it hadn't been polished in the last 20 years. And he lifted up his boot, which had the red mud from when he had been walking down the road, and he places it into the door with enough for and then you get to the point where the splinters are bouncing off of there, and you've done this like 2-page description of him knocking down the door when all you wanted him to do was knock the door down and move in.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about, where it can just get to be too much. So you do want to show, but you have to determine what the best parts are. And this is where you as the author comes in as the storyteller, that you're giving enough information to move your story forward, that you're gauging enough that it paints a picture. But sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter that he's wearing a blue polo shirt. Let them create some of this imagery in their head as well.
Yeah, because they do that anyway, don't they? So you don't, sure, we'll go into description another time, but 1 or 2 items on that is usually enough, isn't it, to create a picture in your head? I mean, I know when you were talking then, I was already imagining the guy.
Yeah,
it's just natural. It's just what we do, isn't it?
It is, and we don't have to do a lot with that. We can get a feeling based on just a few minor ideas, and to move into it. It's amazing how much we can create in our mind, and that's one of the cool things about reading fiction, is that it gives you the chance, because, for instance, like talking about scary jump moments or something like that in a movie, at some point when they show the movie monster, the monster in a book is going to be much scarier to us because we're going to create the look of it. It might come across as being some stupid little Hollywood prop, in a movie, but we'll create the most terrifying thing in the world because it's very specific to us.
That's a really interesting point. I think that's something to think about, especially in the creation of your antagonist, maybe. Yeah, to leave room for someone to insert fears here, kind of thing.
Yeah, and
like in Harry Potter, with the is it the Boggart or the Boggart? And everyone sees their own personal fear, and it makes it so much scarier that she doesn't necessarily describe what that creature is, because the creature takes the place of everyone else's fears.
Mm-hmm. And this is just one more quick example here. Is it talking about like maybe clothing description? I've never picked up a book and been reading a chapter and been like, oh my goodness, everyone in this chapter is naked. because they haven't described what they're wearing.
Unless it's like Disney.
Yeah. So, that I know, I've put them into clothing. I've created a look for them, and I, you don't necessarily need to do all of that. You're drawing the broad strokes of the painting. I'm filling in the detail. And if you have a specific detail that you want to bring out that's important, because that's what we're talking about, you are painting the important details. I'm doing the other non-important details. I know what the business looks like. I know what they're dressed like, because that's going to be unique to me. And you as the author are painting me those really important details that I need to catch on to move forward with the story.
Unless it's 50 Shades of Grey, and then everyone might actually be naked.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Not that I've read it though. Just put that out there.
Come on, we all know. We know.
Okay, I've read it 3 times. No.
You got your signed copy there behind you. So, moving on to our 7th and final tip for general editing, and that is POV, point of view. This is usually not a problem like, most people don't have a problem where they're jumping from first person to third person point of view. Usually when this comes in is that we're head jumping, we're moving from the protagonist's point of view to the antagonist's point of view to some other random character's point of view, and we're not even noticing it because we're not paying attention to how we're phrasing it. We don't mean that to jump necessarily. We're just not noticing our phrasing. And so, like the other day, I was doing some editing for a client and had a line going in there about smell, and that I was in the head of the protagonist, and all of a sudden I'm smelling what his sidekick character is smelling. And so that's a point of view change that wasn't necessary. It was not meant to happen. He wanted to describe the smell, but he did it from the wrong point of view. And so those are just little changes. We got to make sure that we know what our character would know, and we're describing the things through the character's knowledge base.
Yeah, and that's that's so easy to do. I mean, especially if you've got a really interesting sort of side character, because sometimes you can be writing and you're writing from the protagonist's viewpoint, but there's a secondary character in the scene who you really like, and you can be tempted to sort of put their thoughts in and like what they think about the situation, because you want to know that yourself, but you have got to really stick to this rule, really, this point of view.
And but if you want to do that, that's where you come in with the point of view character seeing something. They see that that side character scrunches up their nose and makes a terrible face as they come in contact after they've opened the door, and then the character says something that reinforces what it is that they're smelling or something. Just sticking on the smelling idea there, but it works with any of it. Is that you're just making sure that you're jumping into it. I've been having fun. I've been writing a new middle grade book, and I get to I've been writing it in third person, and I have a dog character, and so I've got like this whole Han Solo Chewie type thing going on, because Chewie growls and doesn't have any subtitles underneath it, and Han is always just kind of saying what he's saying. He's like, well, what do you think? So I've got the same thing kind of idea going on with the kid. The dog barks and the kid's like, yeah, but we can't go over there because this would happen, and so it's fun that you can
like Lassie. Did you have Lassie in America?
Yeah, Lassie, yes.
Boy strapped down the well.
Yeah, what we got to go get him. So it's just kind of fun. You can do those types of little things, but it's just sticking with the correct point of view. And there's so many ways that you can get into getting the knowledge out that you want to get out. You just have to make sure that you're taking the time to do it. So, and not putting it in, not head jumping, because some people that really confuses them. They're like, who are we with? I thought we were
not head jumping without a really well done sort of like scene break. You know, so you could head jump within a chapter, but to have a really clear scene break.
Yeah, and so like for my thriller books, the Another Day, Another Name, in that series, um, there's a ton of characters. There's a ton of characters, and I had to figure out a way to do that, and so like so I have clear like a break and like the page changes, like instead of having indentation, if there's a break line without an indentation, you know that you've jumped. And I try to make it very clear by putting a feeling with the name of the character within that first line so that we know that we've moved. You just have to be very clear if you're going to move point of view, that you've done it on purpose. And so people can know where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, with it not being thriller, I tend to keep it, if I do it a scene break, that there's like a change in like time or location as well. So, even if it's in the same chapter, but not only is like the characters changing, but the time's changing, the location's changing, and that's how I keep it clear, like in fantasy anyway.
Yeah, and because I on the first printing, I did the little three asterisks, like centered up into each break. But there was one chapter where I really wanted this feeling of this car chase where you were jumping in between all of them and going back and forth, and so sometimes it was like one or two lines, and so that became a clumsy look in print, and so kind of developed just a different, simpler way to do it without having to block that out. But you make a choice. You're clear with it, with your point of view. You're clear with how you make the changes on your point of view, and people won't mind it. But if it's a single time, like all of a sudden you've always been in the protagonist's point of view, and then you jump into the side character's point of view in chapter 29 for like 4 sentences, and then you jump out, that's going to really confuse somebody because they don't see it coming.
Yeah, just to say, like you say, you found a simpler way. Just so, like, if people want to use it, do you mean removing the indentation sort of thing?
Right. So I was very clear on how it was done. Is that there was a space, like a page return, not a page return, but a return,
A line break.
a line break, and then instead of the sentence being indented, like on 5 point, which was how everything normally goes, all of a sudden there was no indentation. So it's very clear that that there is a change happening here, and that always happens and occurred. And then, like I also said, is that it is very clear to make sure that I put a feeling and the name of the person who we were moving to. So for instance, my character Mabel. I just finished doing a line, or just finished a scene where I'm in Mabel's head, and we're in the same scene. We're switching to this guy Ludwig's head. So at that point, it'd be like Ludwig grasped the handle of the door, and the cold of it sent a chill up his spine. And so we've said, we've got the character name there. I've got the feeling that they're experiencing. We've made the change. Plus, also having the visual cue that it was a non-indentation, that it was a line break non-indentation. This has happened, and so you've trained your reader to know that that's taking place.
Excellent. That was a really good point to sort of put in there, that in your first sentence to establish the character, or because obviously if you then just start talking about the landscape for like the opening paragraph of the new point of view, when you get into the second paragraph and there's a name mentioned, that could really confuse the reader because they'd be like, "What? Who? I thought we were still talking about the other person."
Yeah, right. So you just want to make sure that's really clear right up front, and it's difficult though. I mean, when you start managing multiple point of views and multiple characters, this is very difficult writing. It's difficult to edit. You need to really make sure that you're well organized. This is going to take a lot of extra effort on your part to make sure that it's being done well. And because if it's not being done well, you're going to get terrible feedback, and you're going to have a lot of confusion going on. So that's why, if you're a first-time novelist, you're just starting out. You're listening to the show, you're editing the show, you probably already have the manuscript done. But I would recommend, that in the future, you try to pull those characters back and try to do as few switches as possible. Not that it's not a bad story, it's just it's a very difficult story to do well, and you want to make sure you're ready for that skill level that you can handle it.
Definitely. I can almost like hear the arms being thrown up in the air. It's like, God damn, I've got like 20 main characters.
Oh, I know. So I'm editing. I'm on the third draft right now of Another Deception, which is the book 2 in my series, the thriller series, and I'm counting up the characters. I'm like, I've got 7 main characters in this book, and I've added 3 more main characters than were in the previous book. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is getting ridiculous. And I use Scrivener, and so I've got all the little cards, and I've got color-coded stuff, and I'm making sure everything's lining up, and that the main characters have the majority of the scenes, and you're making sure that you're not head jumping in the scenes, and you're just like, man, I would be done with this 2 months ago had I had 2 characters.
That's so much to juggle. Do you ever forget about characters?
Yeah, like all of a sudden I'm reading them like, oh shoot, David hasn't been in the scenes for like a long time. I need to have him have a scene so people know that he's important again.
Yeah, or even if there's someone in the room, and then as the scene goes on, you forget that they're in the room. You're like, oh, I better have them do something.
Yeah. So,
even if they just like cough like surreptitiously.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, you forgot about him and left him behind, and and this is, I guess we'll just make this one last point on this, and I don't want it to get off on doing a whole bunch with this, but we're already there. We're already got down this rabbit hole, so I guess we'll go down just a little bit further. Sometimes, you can combine these characters together. That if you can do that eliminates having to jump an additional point of view. If you can narrow them into one character, and sometimes that can work. So,
when you say that, I always imagine sort of like some. Like a character with like split personality or something. So kind of like talking to themselves and like two people in one head.
Yeah, I wrote a script called Snow, and it was a Snow White story set in modern age, and I had a set of 7 dwarves. I had 4 guys who all had different kind of mental instabilities going on, and one of them had multiple personalities to make up the others. So like he jumped from angry to sleepy to dopey.
So he was like the 7 dwarves all in one.
All in one, basically, yeah. So
that'll be a really interesting character.
So, did you have anything else to add on point of view?
I think we pretty much covered it. Maybe to sort of just keep an eye on that, not talking about what they felt like. So feelings is a big sort of like red flag for if you've broke point of view. Like if you're talking about someone else's, anything like subjective, really. Like a feeling, a sense, anything they've sensed. You only really want to be talking about what they're doing and saying, and like that's about it.
Yeah. And also, so if your protagonist point of view, remember that they can't see that their face turned red. They can feel, they can have heat, but you don't see your own face. So those are some things just to remember on point of view that can sound odd if you write it a particular way, that makes it sound like all of a sudden they're having an out-of-body experience looking at themselves. So
that's just like slipping into omniscient, really, isn't it?
It really is.
I guess if that's your writing style and you can do that well, and you can have these little meanderings into omniscient, and that's just the way you write. But as long as you're doing it well, and you're doing it on purpose, then I guess
right.
That could be.
And consistency really is. If you have that consistent in every single chapter, you'll train the reader, and they're used to it. It's when it's not consistent. It's when something jumps out on page 50 that hasn't happened in the first 49 pages of your description with point of view that really throws the person.
Definitely.
So, well, wow. There's so much you can still talk about these, but I hope and what we've been trying to do with these editing tip shows, and we've got 3 more shows that will be coming up for you over the next few weeks. But you can take one of these tips. So today we did read aloud, examine the macro before the micro, use the same tense in your narrative, shorten your sentences, rewrite the passive voice, show versus tell, point of view. And we've given you a little something that you can take from these, immediately go to your manuscript, go to your drafts, and put it to work. And I hope that that's what you've been able to get out of this, at least one of them. So,
yeah, we were really worried that sort of with the concise nature that these would be like we'd run short on the shows, but it's sort of, as you say, it is easy to go down a rabbit hole, as you mentioned earlier, because these are like, especially show versus tell and POV, they're really big topics. So even if someone does take away one of these, it's gonna dramatically help your editing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it should give you a lot of good tools. This is all good stuff for the toolbox, and you can go to it. And don't feel like you need to do all of these at once. And this is very manageable, one at a time. That you can go through. You go through it again with the next one. Control F, find the stuff. Or if using the Mac, whatever the similar one is, Apple F or whatever it is. But
I don't even know.
I don't even know. But that you search them out, you find them, you replace them, and just move forward. So just take it small, one bite at a time, and it won't be too bad. So, really, hey, thank you so much, Peter. This has been a great show. Really appreciate having you on today.
No problem. We covered some awesome stuff. I hope it's been useful for everyone listening.
Yeah, I hope so too. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us and leave a review on iTunes. Tell your friends. If you're an editor who would like to be a guest host or an author who'd like us to edit your work live on air, go to thebookeditorshow.com and drop us a line. For Peter Turley, I am Clark Chamberlain. Keep learning, keep writing, and build a better book.